You're listening to Crushing Classical, How to Thrive in Your Creative Career. I'm your host, Janet Ingle, oboist, entrepreneur, author, and business and creative coach for musicians. Today on the podcast, you'll hear my interview with Emily Martin and Elizabeth McDonald, voice teachers, academics, and co-founders of EM2connect, a small creative facilitation practice. I didn't know them before this interview, but they're clearly kindred spirits, and I know you will love them. I hope you enjoy this episode. EM2connect is Emily Martin and Elizabeth McDonald. As ideators and performers, the two have sung and taught all over the world as solo opera singers and as members of the performing trio Women on the Verge, an international group of women dedicated to advocating for women-centered stories. EM2connect is also a small creative facilitation practice made up of the high-energy and ideas-driven duo, raising collaboration to the power of two. EM2connect specializes in rebranding, repositioning, and promoting flexible thinking around artistic careers. Their work is centered on The Process, a collaborative support program where artists redefine their artistic philosophy as a foundation for strategic career thinking. I found that our conversation rhymed with a lot of things I too have been thinking about. The need for musicians and artists to take agency in their own creative practices, for one. It's so important, and it's not taught in school, and in fact, almost no one teaches it. Either you figure it out for yourself in a process of trial and error over years or decades, or you don't. I found their framework for helping artists to lead with their values so inspiring. And this feels like a good time to point out my own values. I want more creatives to thrive in their own lives. We know that there are not enough orchestra jobs, not enough tenure track positions, not enough institutional positions to accommodate everyone with an artistic bent. But that does not mean that there's no place for artistry in your life if you haven't been lucky enough to land one of those gigs. My mission here on the podcast is to celebrate the musicians who are doing unique and important things with and for their craft. And all of that is in service of showing creatives like you what is possible. Maybe you hear some of these stories and take inspiration. Maybe you are one of those musicians forging your own path. I'd love to hear from you too. But I also really resonated with Emily and Elizabeth's commitment to group education in their Process program, because I've seen the same. For oboists, there's a real scarcity of community opportunities. Geography is a problem for oboists. There are not very many in a given town. And sometimes when you do have players nearby, you get a little competitive for gigs. I think that when I started my own program, The Invincible Oboist, I was mostly excited by the possibilities of group teaching to promote discussion and learning and efficiency, frankly. But what I discovered after not very long is that the community itself is an enormous benefit. People feel less alone. They feel supported. They are supported. And they grow artistically and technically faster than they would have on their own. The magic of groups is not just the efficiency of delivering the teaching, it's exponential peer-led improvement. And I'm all the way bought in on it. If you're a studio teacher, whether you have 10 students or 30 private lessons to teach every week, I really encourage you to develop some group components to your program. I did not do this when I was teaching privately, outside of the occasional holiday party. And now that I've seen the benefit for everyone, I'm never going back. If you, in your own teaching, need some help brainstorming this kind of offer, feel free to reach out to me. I have links in the show notes and from my website to help you book a call, and I love this kind of conversation. And now, please enjoy Emily Martin and Elizabeth McDonald and their brilliance. Remember when I interviewed Heidi K. Begay back in episode 12? She is all about helping musicians to thrive and grow, and she's one of the creators of the Ultimate Music Business Summit, which will take place in January of 2023. This event will feature more than 24 expert presentations and live panels over 3 days. I'll be one of the presenters, but I'm even more excited to attend myself and to learn from the experts in various aspects of our music business. Early bird tickets are on sale this month, and I have a special link in the show notes to get you connected to this summit. If you're building your own creative business or thinking about it, you might want to look into the Ultimate Music Business Summit. Emily Martin and Elizabeth McDonald, welcome to Crushing Classical.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. I have been in a deep dive on your gorgeous website this morning, the EM2connect.com, and really vibing on like the generosity of your blog and your work and your offers. And rather than me trying to encapsulate this for our listeners, would you start, one of you, by just introducing us to M2Connect and what your company is and does?
Sure, Elizabeth, why don't you go for it?
I'm Elizabeth, just so that our listeners get a sense of different voices. Sometimes it's hard when we can't see each other. So I'm Elizabeth McDonald, and I'm actually in Prince Edward County, Canada right now, and that's where I live and work from mostly. And EM2connect is basically a career facilitation service for artists or artistic people. And our whole mission is to help artists define what a successful career means to them. And this was born out of the pandemic and all of us shutting down. Just a really quick backstory, and we can go into this more later, but Emily and I are both former opera singers turned academic teachers at university. And of course, when COVID shut down, all the live music shut down, but the singers especially got literally muzzled. And so we had so many people reaching out asking us what to do next that that's how EM2connect, or EM squared, because we both have EM initials. Nice. That's how we sort of started, was all of these people coming to us saying, what do we do next? And so we've evolved through this time and now hopefully out of the pandemic. Are we out of the pandemic yet?
Very hard to say.
I know. And it depends on what state or province you're in, or where, if you're in Europe or not, I don't know. So anyway, but we evolved out of that, or we've evolved through that to create career facilitation and coaching services for artists, to help them to take that next step in their careers and to discover who they are artistically. And we do that through coaching, one-on-one coaching, facilitation, as well as workshops and consultations, grant writing opportunities, and things like that. So that's sort of the quick and skinny, dirty on that.
That is gorgeous. And like that mission could not be nearer and dearer to my heart, of course, right? We all want artists to be thriving in the world and to be creating their own careers and taking agency for themselves, because we all learned during COVID that like that's not that relying on the institutions that we had thought were going to bring us success was no longer the answer, right? People in my world, the orchestral world, who had won those perfect one paycheck jobs, the ones that everyone dreams of getting. And suddenly their orchestras said, yeah, we're not going to pay you because we're not having concerts, and it's just over for a while, for an indefinite time.
Right.
So what does it look like now for singers, especially, to move forward in the world? Like what kinds of projects are you working on?
Well, I think just to backtrack to what you said about COVID really showed us that this was not a tenable model. I actually think there, even before COVID, we knew that it wasn't, but COVID just sort of reminded us and then made us really sit up and say, oh, this is something we need to change. And so partly where this also came out of was this design thinking, this idea of us as a business, but at the same time, if we're going to change the community, if we're going to change the world, if we're going to really, as artists, bring our art into the world rather than just perform, what does that look like? And so there's a number of things that we're doing as EM2connect, but also individually. So one of the things that I'm currently doing is I am on a Fulbright in the Netherlands, working at the Royal Conservatory, who has some great programming that looks at this specific thing of artists as innovators and artists in the community. So I'm doing that. And then we're bringing that back into our one-on-one facilitation and our workshops, and using that as a resource to really promote the people that we're working with and really show them that I think it comes back to community. It all comes back to how can we influence our community and the people around us. So Elizabeth, do you have anything to add sort of to that?
Well, and I think that there's a challenge in all of this too with what Emily is talking about, which is this really amazing broad thinking about engaging community and like audience development and how do we connect. And we're writing grants right now for an organization talking about all those things. But if we take even a further step back and we microscope just the individual artist, there are so many things that young artists especially, and sometimes mid-career artists too, that they don't have skills to even be able to have start those bigger thinking conversations. And some of those things are things like business and financial literacy. Mm-hmm. I'm not a business coach, but I've had my own business for 25 years. And we've developed, Emily and I have been in a number of initiatives and partnerships and things that have connected us financially. And you've had to figure out how to stick handle those things. And I look at a lot of these young artists that are sort of in the world right now, and they don't have any concept of that. And so when we look at these broader things, awesome, but I'm personally really concerned about how do these, emerging artists gain the necessary skills to even be able to have a conversation with somebody about their finances or their taxes or a good investment of whether or not they continue in grad school or go to the next grad school or not, or how do you have a conversation with an advancement office and say, like, I don't have enough money. How are you going to pay me to be here? Those are really basic conversations. And of course, obviously there's these awesome bigger concepts of community, but at the bottom line, and I think Jeanette, that you do this so well on your website with that idea of the read-making business and supporting I mean, that is such a specific niche thing, but the fact that you're having impact on something so specific, I think is so hugely important. So having those drilled down business conversations is really obviously important. So
yes, I think I love it. I'm looking at my split screen with Elizabeth on my left and Emily on my right, and I hear like the big picture, what can we create in the world and what can we create from the community over on my right, and then the micro, like how can we empower individual artists to understand how this works. It's sort of
that is a perfect synopsis too of each of us as artists and business people.
And I think the world needs both things for sure. We need adulting for artists.
Yeah.
Just
That's great.
The basic level of how do you understand yourself as a business, which is not taught to us. We're taught the absolute micro of how do we make a perfect little feminine ending in a Handel aria, and how do we ornament, and how do we craft the absolutely micro nuances and inflections of what we are performing. And maybe we're taught to expand that and to think about how are we going to take those micro nuances and project them onto in a big venue, right? How are we going to project all the way to the back of the audience? But I feel like, remembering my conservatory education, that's as far as it went. The small and the big were still exclusively about how do you play the oboe better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And I will say that this isn't just in our own industry as artists. This is happening in any kind of professional school. My husband's a chiropractor. He didn't take business classes. He learned about how the body works and how it's all connected and how to be an excellent adjuster as a chiropractor. So when he came out of school, he didn't have business skills, but but and then but the bank's happy to give him money. And so then it's that whole thing. We are not alone in that conversation. And I think that's also, I think that can be really empowering for artists, because I think it's easy for people to look at artists and go, well, you don't know anything. Well, I'm sorry, if you haven't done a commerce degree, you don't know anything either. So
Right.
about
Like
those things.
exactly. And I've heard people complain that music schools are so niche that they just don't teach you the skills that you actually need. But you're exactly right. No one teaches you the skills that you actually need. A 4-year degree is not enough time to become a full adult with all of the knowledge and capability and basic understanding and savvy that we have in our 30s, 40s, 50s. Like it's not there. So you have to seek out your own learning opportunities and your own mentorship and your own help.
Well, I would argue that it's not just finances that are not taught, right? It's this ability to take the knowledge that you gain in the 4-year institution, and how does that affect the bigger picture? How does that affect where you are going versus I can add this and this, or I can write this paper? We have lost in all education, and not just artists, how does our knowledge that we gain affect the broader world? And
exactly.
So I think that,
Again,
that is even bigger. Yeah. Sorry.
It's huge. Again, from the right side of my screen. Exactly that. We need the ability to take the thing that we know and then project it outward and put the magic of what we do into language that is not academic language, but actual copy that attracts people and that shows people what we're actually about and what we're talking about. And then the ability to create relationships and go into communities and figure out what they need and what you can create, and the ability to dream big. These are huge and so important. So I love what you are doing. Can I I would love to, I really just want to hear you talk more about that, about what does it look like to broaden the vision and to dream bigger, because I'm a big ideator. I love this stuff.
Yeah. We're with you on that. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, so we actually have two sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? We have two avenues that we take with clients. So we have the clients that want to specifically do the career work. So we have a workshop coming up where they want to learn how to keep track of young artist programs and how to organize their time and all that kind of stuff. Then we have the other track, which we call the process, which is more along the lines of figuring out your artistic philosophy. So the idea is that if, as an artist, you can figure out your why, and that sounds so cliche, but it really comes down to what is the language that you use to talk about your artistic choices? What is the language that you use when it comes to the choices that you make in a broader sense of who you are in your artistic life? And then also, how do you take all of that? What are the audiences that you want to influence? What do you want to say about your music? And so really encouraging artists to take some ownership of their language and ownership of their creativity. And I know this is also very close to your heart. I was looking at your book. I have not read it, unfortunately, but I do know that this is really, it's like rediscovering your creativity, figuring out what your creativity really stems from. And so really trying to help artists understand that, again, it's not just about singing that Handel aria, but why are you singing the Handel aria? Who is the audience going to listen to it? How are you going to perform it so that audience listens to it? How do you want that Handel aria to be in the community and influence people in your community? So really all the questions behind the actual learning of the music and learning of the artistic sense.
And then just to add to that, I think it's also, that's very much about me, the artist, but I also think we also want to encourage, and we do, is that idea of how do we invite the conversation to come back to us from that community that's in our space, or that whether we put ourselves in that space or we've been invited in that space. How does the dialogue happen between your community and yourself as an artist, or even if we just want to say the audience and yourself as an artist? What are the tools or the methods or all of the things that can go with that in creating that conversation about the how, the what, the why, right?
Can you say more about that? Like, how do you foster that?
I don't know.
That kind of back and forth.
Some days I don't know. To be perfectly honest, some days I don't know.
Well,
and I think it depends, right?
Yeah.
Actually, Emily, maybe you want to talk a bit about what you're experiencing right now through like in The Hague.
Yes, I'll do that in a second. I wanted to just get back to, I think, Janet, you're asking about actually the tools that we use, right? And so usually this process that we're talking about takes place over 4 weeks. And the outline, so you understand, is that the first week, we're really defining your why. So when we have worksheets and we talk to people about what is your why to do this, most likely the answer that we get back is, okay, so I don't understand what that means. Like, is this my values in how I sing? Is this my values in my life? Is this what I like? What does this mean? And so just that, and trying to explain to them that you're looking at the value of your art in the entirety of your life and not just when you go into a practice room, is the first step. And then the second step is for them to use that language to identify the project that they're interested in. And not everybody has a project, but most people have something in the back of their brain that's been rattling around that they're like, this is something I really want to do, but I'm not sure I want to do it. And I don't know how to do it. And so we start creating those connections between them finding their values and their artistic philosophy and their why and the actual language, because that's where people run up against things, right? They know it in the back of their brain, but they don't have language. And then we start making those connections between that and that project that really gets you excited. And how do those two things meet? And then in the last week, we kind of set them up for success by saying, here are some of the things that might help you get to that next level. And then we also create community within the group. So, you know, one person might say, I need a producer for this. And somebody else might say, well, I know this person. And so in a way, we're creating all these levels for people to experience a new way of doing things. So that's the nitty gritty and the nuts and bolts of how we do it, is teaching people how to find their language and then helping them develop that.
What I love is that sort of in the 20 minutes we've been talking, you've walked through exactly that, right? You showed the bigness of your mission and the 2 tracks of what is happening. And then of course we're just in conversation, but you're also like able to break the bigness down in such a concrete and beautiful way. That was really inspiring to hear. And like really resonant for me. I feel like back in my, 10, 15 years ago, I assigned myself the task of like, maybe if I had a mission statement, then I would understand what it is I'm doing in my career. And like, it's such a loosey-goosey thing to create. And, my first 18 attempts were just, full of flowery words with no actual purpose behind them. And it's taken a long time and a lot of evolution to feel like I do understand what it is I'm doing in the world. And it may change next year too, but like,
exactly.
That is the piece that I think is hugely important, is that we don't get stuck in this one definition, because I think if we've learned anything from COVID, everything can change just like that. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've really insisted that Emily and I do as just business thinkers or trying to develop this business or whatever, is that we do not let ourselves get stuck in a way. When we started, it looked very different. It functioned not hugely different, but it functioned differently. The day-to-day looked different. And now 2.5 years later, it's looking different again, and it's evolved, and we've changed we've tested the waters. I think there's a point we can go too far, obviously, but that's what you're supposed to do. And that's what we're supposed to do as artists, is like I say to my students all the time, like, find the parameters of the space you're in, bang the walls a bit, figure out what that is. And now let's work and continue to hit those parameters and figure out, does that work for you? And if that room that you're in musically, artistically doesn't work, then let's go find a different room. And I'm walking around my office now as I talk. And so it's that idea of not getting stuck. Like you said, it's 18, 19 iterations of your mission statement. Like, I feel like I still don't have mine drilled down, right? That it keeps morphing. And the other piece to it too, that I think that we're really adamant about, and me personally especially, is that we aren't just artists in a vacuum. We have families, we have friends, we live in different communities. Emily and I live in very different communities. We have different our kids are different ages. We're in different sort of like work situations. Like how do we then allow all of that to be part of that mission statement and create and be part of the values and all of that? Especially as women. So
because when you say especially as women, you refer to the fact that there's always something pulling at us. There's
always I believe that my experience as a mom has been that there's always something pulling at you. And I also have experienced being a young mother in the opera industry and the challenges of that, being a woman in academia and the challenges of that. And we've had varying degrees of experience, some of it positive, a lot of it negative. And I think that we are always, there's so much being written about women in work and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to go there. We don't need to, but the idea that we always feel like we have to fit into a box or we have to do things a certain way, that is one of the beautiful parts of being in a partnership where the goal is to keep changing and evolving. And it's okay to be messy and it not look like the way you think it's supposed to. And so then encouraging that with our clients as well.
Could that not be more resonant? Like I talk all the time about how if you're going to start a new project, if you're going to create a new business, if you're going to create something, it's not going to be perfect the first time around, and it shouldn't be expected to be, right? We have to start small, we have to start messy, and we have to let it evolve because you don't know what you don't know, and you have to get it.
But we're not teaching that to our students in music school or any other school.
No.
Right?
They
have
stay in the
get
practice
A.
room until it's perfect.
Stay in the practice room. I have to get the A. If I don't get the A, I've failed. We've taught them these black and white, and we keep teaching that. And so somewhere it has to give. And so right now, of course, Elizabeth and I can't change academia. We're trying one classroom at a time, but we can't change it. So where do we come in with that? And that's partly where we've also come in with this, is how do we give these skills to these poor artists that are trying so hard?
And then how does the work, I always feel too, how does this work serve my academic teaching? Because I think that there has to be a symbiotic relationship between the two. I can't go to my university job and like shut this part off and be like, oh, I'm just gonna, I can't do that. That doesn't fit in my values. So fortunately, I have some flexibility to be able to do that, but only a little bit, right? So you have to find those little cracks and
right, and which brings us right back to that conversation about artistic flexibility and where how are you going to flex and bend and make your career, not make your career, that sounds very but allow your career to evolve in an intentional way, in a directed way toward that vision.
I would argue that making a career, I am okay with that language because we have to make it ourselves, right?
Right. And I think that's also part of it is educating our students that there's a million ways to make a career. If we're going to, and I think that's where make does come in, right? Is that you are responsible for making the choices. It doesn't mean you're always going to get the job. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be successful. But once you take ownership of your values and the reason you're doing it, then you are making choices. And so I think most students don't realize that there are so many ways to be successful, if we want to say that, in music or art or anything. And so the more we can show them that that's the way, and Elizabeth and I have done that multiple times in our own careers and the things that we've done. And so I think it's also important for the people who are saying those things to also be practicing them. And it's because that changes, right? And because our students need to see us doing that. And so that's also part of the conversation.
And I think that also speaks really beautifully to a lot of the artists that we work that are sort of mid-career, that maybe are our own generation or maybe just a half a generation below us. I don't know, however you say that. because we've all been trained in a very similar system, and now things have really changed, but everybody has sort of stayed in that pipeline for so long. Now everybody's sort of popping their head up, looking around and going, okay, what's next? We understand that pipeline and the need or the desire to sort of jump out of it. And so it isn't just the young artist that has not got those skills. Sometimes it's the mid-career artist that thinks that they're stuck and they can only do this thing here. And I think that was one of the most that was some of the work we did right at the beginning in the pandemic. Was we had one particular singer, because that was our network, that was really, really wanting to make some pivots. And so we worked with this person, and they had some specific ideas about what that pivot was going to be. I mean, they had all of their work was gone, right?
Yeah.
And so working with them to help them evolve and discover what, and to dig into what they thought that next thing was going to be. And then to see them be successful based on, you know, how they defined their own success, was so incredibly exciting and motivating. It's that one situation really got me excited. And it was a pretty traditional kind of thing. It wasn't like crazy pie in the sky, but it doesn't have to be. It has to be what it is. It has to be right for you. And that was what was so cool, is that they were very like, this is what I need to do. And this is why, you know, it was about family. It was about stability. It was about all of their values. And so I think that's really, for me, that's really exciting and rewarding. Especially when it's not just about this younger generation, it's about us too. We can pivot and change and be flexible. Just because we're this age doesn't mean we can't.
No, absolutely not. And like the two of you are living proof, right? You are moving from being opera singers to like being this expansive mentorship presence to musicians at all levels and at all ages. And I love this conversation and the flexibility that you are espousing. And it's actually really inspiring to me to hear you talk so much about individuals defining their own values and their own sense of what success means. Like, that's just not something that I'd put into words in that way before. And it's very inspiring to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well, it comes back to the mission statement. I think it's so interesting that you did 18 of them. You said you did 18. I'm sure you did more. I will be honest that the 18 would have killed me. Like, 18 is hard, but you're right. You need to do it that much. But I can't imagine of doing 18 until I had language that led me to actually writing the statement. And I commend you for writing and writing and writing, because when I sat down to write my mission statement or artistic philosophy or whatever you want to call it, there was no way I was going to do that until I actually had specific words. I mean, we're talking like 5 words. And so partly how we even start with that is we say to artists, what are other artists that you like, right? And that's easy. Pretty much everybody can, and I'm always like, not singers. But what are artists? And that's very hard for singers to think about outside of their box. And then I say, why do you like them? And that's when people get stuck. Right. And then they start going, oh, okay, there's something that they all line up with. But the minute you ask anybody why they like something, that's when it starts to really. So I commend you for writing that many times, because it's hard. It's really hard to do it, but you need the language.
Exactly. It took a lot of exploration and a lot of figuring out. And a thing that I found fascinating, and this is maybe tangential, we'll see if it leads back productively or if we like cut it out of the interview entirely. We'll find out. At one point, I did do a similar exercise, like thinking about other artists that I admired and trying to put words on what it was that I admired. And I found myself really coalescing around the word generosity. And I'm like, ooh, I've never thought of myself as generous, but I can see how I want to be. And after having that aha inside my head and writing it down in my mission statement, which was only inside my own computer and not, out in the world and in public, I suddenly noticed that over the next 6 months, everybody was using that word about me. Like when they would write in little surveys after programs, or when they reached out to me after a recital or anything, the word just came up over and over again. And I had not put that out in the world. It had just come into my intentions.
I love this conversation, and this is a much bigger conversation that we could go to, where you put your intention out to the universe, right? And then it comes back to you, usually not the way you imagine it's going to come back to you, but it's that idea. And that's wonderful. And that's what we do find with most clients, is that once they can pinpoint what is that thing that really draws them, almost always it's very similar from artist to artist to artist. It's freedom, or it's willing to take risks, or it's all of these things. And they had never thought about that before. I mean, we had one client, which was so interesting, and she did this exercise, and part of her project was to design her own website, to redesign it. And she started putting, with these words, colors, right? And so it was really interesting to see how then she took those colors and implemented them into her website because of what these words meant to her. And then it all started to really click, all the way around. So it's just wonderful to hear how a word can go to so much bigger, than so generosity goes to everything. Yeah.
And I think that what I love about that example with that client, and what you've just said too, Janet, is that sometimes we can think that this big thinking and this sort of just this big thinking is not practical. That it's that we have to have these big, crazy thoughts, these big ideas. And then what we need to do is see that they can be brought together and put into focus and put into the practical realities of what do we need to do now to put food on our table, to pay our rent, to do those things. Yes. It's not just about, we have all these great pie in the sky ideas. It's let's bring them back into focus. And so building a website is kind of not hard, right? in some ways. Yeah. No, but do you know what I mean? I can put my name on a website, www.elizabethmcdonald.ca, and it can have my name and a link to email me. It can be that simple. But to build a website that reflects your values and you think about these things and all of that, that's what's hard. Yes. But the practicality of being able to find me online is the same whether or not we do that thinking or not. But my point is just that we can do all of that and it be so aligned with our values that's why then people start to say you're generous, because you put that into that. Or these colors, this person is very visual, like me. So super visual, that engaged. So then people that are like her are going to be engaged in that. And I think that's what's so cool. I'm the drill it down, make it practical person, as we've already discovered. Like, what is the bottom line? What's the number there? Right?
Yeah, totally.
But sometimes we get scared to do the bigger work in order to find that bottom line. And it takes time.
It absolutely does. And both parts are so important. And I love this idea of how does that big mission statement, that big value, how does that filter down into everything that you can do? When you're balancing your checkbook, how can you do it in a way that is generous? Yeah. I just made up that example. But I also love your idea that the more clarity you have about what those values are, the more you attract those people to you. Yeah. Can I ask you, I'd mentioned it several times, artists versus singers and women. And do you primarily serve singers? Do you primarily serve women? Or who comes to you?
Interesting.
A whole lot of singers, because that's the world we're in.
Sure.
I love the broader artist term. I think that I'd like to think that singers are artists. All joking aside, singers are artists. Because our networks certainly in these early days have been singers. We've worked with a lot of singers, but it's starting to broaden a little bit more, where we're working with musicians, with sort of not-for-profit small organizations, with some of the grant writing and the sort of languaging in order to write grants and things like that, which is a very specific thing, of course. Certainly the idea of the broader artistic, creative entrepreneur is where we're going. And singers have been the early vehicle, if that makes sense. Sure.
No, absolutely. That's so resonant for me. I think of myself as, especially on this podcast, as serving and celebrating artists and for artists. And the primary people who are in my circle are oboists, because that's
and I think, again, this is where the silo happens in music to a certain extent. I'm not sure if it happens in dance or theater, but I know in music, there is this sort of silo of like, most of my friends are singers. Most of the people I communicate with singers, and that's not how I want it to be. And I know both Elizabeth and I would love to expand it. But again, this comes back to the morphing and the learning and the changing. We're not sure quite how to get it out there. I know that here where I am at the Royal Conservatory, I'm only working with instrumentalists. I didn't say musicians, I said instrumentalists. And so that's always like this thing with singers, but I'm working almost entirely with instrumentalists. My mentor is a percussionist. And so this is a whole other realm that I'm getting to be a part of and learn about. But, you know, it's constant morphing, it's constant change. And we're trying really hard to get the bigger word out there, because I do think it will influence artists in general.
Yeah. Yes. Wonderful. And like, absolutely, it should. I haven't heard anything, with the exception of our conversation about Handel arias, which I think I started, that is specific to singers over other creative artists.
Could there be a Handel aria for an oboe though? Like,
why, actually, yes. And now, you know what? I was about to like name it, but I can't remember it exactly, and so I'll butcher the Italian. But yes, of course.
I think Handel did write arias for instruments. So I was like, I think there could be other arias.
Yes, why? Of course there are. This is a fantastic conversation. I expect that this podcast will air in around a month or so. Is there anything coming up that you would like to talk about or invite people to check out?
Sure. Yeah. Elizabeth, do you want to talk about the workshop, and then I'll talk about some of the intensives and stuff like that?
Well, we're doing a workshop at the end of September. So if this comes out in a month, it might have passed. But that workshop is a very specific I'm going to say it's a niche workshop about being able to research and track. We've created a database for researching and tracking sort of young artist opportunities, grad school, creating sort of a system for developing your audition videos, things like that. So that's a really specific thing we're doing at the end of September. We will likely do that again because it's something that we can, there's different seasons in the work. Although it seems like now the season of auditioning is just constant because you just throw a video at people. But we still, that idea of being able to track. So that's the end of September. But we are starting the Process Collective in January, which is a monthly group collective where artists meet. And it's the idea of encouraging and supporting and connecting so that it's, I read about what you did with oboists sort of at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, we had started an online community, and we're continuing to morph this idea of how do we create community within our network and to create and to sort of have that conversation, especially as we've said, we've come from the singer world. Competition is huge in the singer world. I'm sure it's the same in the orchestral world, in that you're competing for that one seat. But we're really trying to encourage this concept of community over competition. How do we support each other, that if you're successful, it doesn't mean I'm not? How can we both be successful? How can we share our network, our resources, our inspirations? And how can we do that in a generous way, which, again, that word that keeps coming up. I love that. And so that's going to start in January. And that'll run once a month through the winter and into the spring. And then people can always do one of our strategic intensives. That can start anytime. That's 10 weeks in a row of meetings with one of us actually, I think Emily is going to do it this time or for the next little while. Where you come and you're like, I need to kickstart it. I want to work one-on-one. I want to kickstart it. I want to do it for a finite amount of time. We're going to do the process. We're going to talk about a project, whatever it is that the artist needs. So that can start anytime. So it doesn't matter when this airs. So, and then we have the bigger one-on-one coaching facilitation that we do over 6 or 9 months. The 6-month one can start anytime. The 9 months, we usually try to give ourselves a summer holiday. So that's the part about the parenting and the developing a business that works for your lifestyle. So, yes, you're nodding heavy. Yeah, we want to be home with our kids. And it's nice. I live in a nice place. There's lakes. It's like, I want to be outside. So we try to sort of develop packages around our own lifestyles. So that one would be more probably likely by the time people are looking. It'd be a 6-month sort of, we would meet a couple of times a month. We'd work in a longer, slower gesture, I guess you'd say. So those are some of the ways, and that all you can find on our website, which is EM2connect.com. And it's the number 2. So
Fantastic. I'll have that in the show notes as well.
sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I loved this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to say that we didn't have a moment for?
I just
I
want to
loved
say,
this concept
Yeah, me
too.
too.
Emily, go ahead.
I just hope that artists and others, creatives, but artists especially, take the chance to do this work. I think, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I think a lot of artists are hesitant, first of all, because it's new. Secondly, because they're worried about the financial aspect of it, which is something that Elizabeth and I always work with people, because it's more important to get the information out than it is for them to pay a lot of money for it. And there's many ways to do it. And thirdly, it's scary. Like, it's scary that you feel like you might not have the answers for these things. But we have proven over and over again with ourselves and with other people that you always have the answer. You just have to have somebody hold your hand and help you find the answer. And once you find the answer, it's so freeing, because then you feel like you're invincible when it comes to what you do with your art. And so I just really hope that more people take a chance on this, because it's hard to express to people how important it is. Once they do it, they get it. So that's the last thing I want to say.
Phenomenal. Thank you both so much for talking with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe on your app of choice and leave a review too, because it really helps us. Don't forget to check out the Ultimate Music Business Summit. It's happening January 5th through the 7th, and it's going to have a ton of value for creative entrepreneurs. You can check out the link in the show notes and grab the early bird discount before October 31st. Our theme music was composed by Dream Vance. You can hear his newest album, Rama, on Spotify and Apple Music, and follow him there for more innovative synthwave music. You can find me at janetingle.com, which is also where you can pick up a copy of the Happiest Musician book, reach out to me with thoughts or questions about the podcast, or apply for a possibility session to explore your own portfolio career and thriving musical life. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.